Hello Earthlings and welcome to my space. On today's video, we're going to be covering somebody who I think still has the title for most hated woman in America. That's right, it's Caylee Anthony. I do know Caylee Anthony did do a Peacock documentary, which we will dive into, I feel like, in a different video, only because Peacock decided to give her 3 episodes that were roughly about an hour long each. Essentially, I just watched Avatar, or I just watched, Lord of the Rings, and that's how much they gave her. I feel like, personally, all she deserved was the length of a B-rated horror movie, an hour and 30 minutes tops. That's all we needed to hear, especially with what was said in the documentary. And the reason why I think that it needs its own little video is simply because I want to dissect every single part of it, because it's a lot and it's ridiculous. So in this video, I just want to go over the actual court case, because they don't, in my opinion, I don't think they really necessarily went over the details of the case. Essentially, the Peacock was more for her to say what she wanted to say versus actually going over the facts of the case. So that's why I want to do this video today, for the people who maybe need a refresher, don't remember, or you just don't even know about Caylee Anthony. So I'm introducing you to Caylee Anthony for the first time. So without further ado, we're gonna get right into this video. If you like today's video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And so here we go. Caylee Anthony was born March 19th of 1986 in Warren, Ohio. Her parents were Cindy and George Anthony, and Caylee was one of 2 children. From the outside looking in, Caylee was described as a bright, personable girl with friends and an ordinary American family. At the age of 19, Caylee Anthony would lie again, and this lie would be a lot bigger. She was pregnant, but when her parents would confront her about the fact that she was gaining weight and that, you know, if something wasn't adding up, she would deny this to her parents. She would tell her parents that she was not only not pregnant, but she was a virgin. And eventually, like, you can hide a baby. I think, like, you can hide being pregnant, like, but you eventually are gonna pop out a baby one day. So eventually you're gonna have to tell somebody. So after finally being confronted by her brother and her mom, she did in fact say that she was pregnant, but she never did tell her family who the father of her child was. Caylee Anthony was born August 9th of 2005. A friend of Caylee said that she was considering giving Caylee up for adoption, but was talked out of it by her mother. Caylee lived with her parents for the years following Caylee's birth. Jesse Grudd played the role of dad to Caylee because he genuinely thought he was, but a DNA test would later prove that to be false. Mid-June 2008, Caylee Anthony's suitability as a mother was put into question by her own mom, and this would lead to a lot of fights, and eventually it led to one big fight that caused Caylee to move out, and she took Caylee with her. The following weeks after Caylee left the family home, Cindy would call Caylee to catch up with her and to catch up with her granddaughter. But every time that she would call Caylee to talk to her granddaughter, Caylee would always say that Caylee was unavailable, and that whenever Cindy would ask where she's at, she would always claim that she is with the nanny. And the nanny's name was Zenadiah Fernandez Gomez, shortly known as Zanny the Nanny. On July 13th of 2008, Caylee's parents got a letter stating that their daughter's car was sitting in a tow yard. George went to get the car and found Caylee's purse, Caylee's car seat, and toys inside of it. George also noticed a strong smell like organic matter decomposing coming from the trunk of the car. Being concerned from what they found in the tow yard, Cindy Anthony went looking for her daughter, and she found her. She found her at her boyfriend's house, Tony Larazzo, and she takes her daughter and she brings her home. But wait a second, when you left with Caylee. When you come back, Caylee's nowhere to be found. So after questioning God knows for how long, Caylee Anthony finally admitted that Zanny the Nanny had taken Caylee on June 16th and she had kidnapped her. After Caylee Anthony's disappearance, Cindy Anthony calls the Orange County Sheriff's office in order to report her missing. And a string of 911 calls, Cindy Anthony can be heard demanding that her daughter Caylee Anthony be arrested, and she also states that the smell that was emanating from the trunk of Caylee's car, she is quoted saying, "It smells like there's been a dead body in here." During Caylee Anthony's questioning, police found some discrepancies in what she was saying versus the signed statement she initially made about Caylee's disappearance. After questioning and interviewing multiple friends and families, it was determined that Zanny the nanny actually never existed at all. Caylee Anthony was caught in another lie when she told police officers that she still worked at Universal Studios. She even went out the way to take them on a tour through Universal, only to, at the end, tell them that it was a lie, that she did work there, but she actually just never returned. Caylee Anthony was arrested on July 16th for child neglect, interfering with the criminal investigation, and lying to police officers. As the search went on, investigators started to question Casey's actions before Caylee was reported missing. Caylee Anthony was out partying, and in the early July, got a tattoo that read Bella Vita, which translates to beautiful life in Italian. She was also seen out shopping while her daughter was missing. Caylee would return home on August 21st when a TV personality / bounty hunter, Tony Padala, paid for her $500,000 bond, and he did so with the intention or the thought that Caylee Anthony would come out of jail and tell the world what happened to Caylee and where she was. He was sadly disappointed when Caylee did not do any of that. She provided no additional information to where her daughter was, and this would anger Tony. And so he would describe Tony would describe Caylee as narcissistic and promiscuous. So these descriptions of Caylee Anthony did not help her image at all. I'm just gonna say, did not help her image. Because people were outraged by her behavior. People just did not understand why she was not acting as a typical mother would if her daughter had disappeared. Caylee Anthony's freedom did not last long. She was sent back to jail 8 days later for forging checks and identity theft. On December 11th, 2008, Roy Kronk discovered a plastic bag with human remains in a wooded area that was less than half a mile away from the Anthony home. In the bag, it had a skull with duct tape around it, and ironically, Kronk says that he told the detectives or told police officers to search this particular area when the searches were initially going off in the summer. 8 days later, the remains would be confirmed as Caylee Anthony's. Orange County medical examiner stated that Caylee's remains showed no signs of trauma, and therefore it was going to be ruled as a homicide of undetermined means. Caylee Anthony's remains were found with duct tape around the nose, mouth, and jaw, but due to her advanced state of decomp, it made it impossible for investigators to determine the exact date of death and the cause of death. Caylee Anthony's trial started June 2011, which was 3 years after the disappearance of her daughter. Opening statement, prosecutor Linda Drain Burdick says that Caylee Anthony died due to the fact that there were pieces of duct tape that were placed over her nose and her mouth. Whereas Caylee Anthony's lawyer, Jose Badaz, he states that Caylee died due to a swimming pool accident that was covered up by her family. Due to the fact that they could not pinpoint the cause of death, both theories were allowed in court, though prosecutors believed that they had enough circumstantial evidence to prove that Caylee killed her daughter in the summer of 2008. Caylee Anthony had originally stated that Caylee was kidnapped by the babysitter, but Jose suggested a different set of events during his opening statement. Badaz claimed that Caylee and her grandmother, Cindy Anthony, swam most of Father's Day, June 15, 2008, and suggested that Cindy forgot to pull up the ladder that prevented the toddler from climbing into the pool on her own. He suggested that Caylee slipped into the pool when nobody was looking. The distraught family panicked and did not call the police. Badaz also questioned the meter maid Kronk, the one who originally found Caylee's body, and he asked whether he found Caylee's body where he found it or he had moved Caylee's body from an original location and brought it to where he found it. Though Badaz never actually goes into detail or anything about where he thought he might have taken Caylee's body from initially. Jose laid out a laundry list of accusations to explain Caylee Anthony's behavior, including that George Anthony essayed his daughter and that her brother Lee also made advances toward her, which resulted in Lee being given a paternity test to see if he was Caylee's father. All those secrets eventually led to the cover-up of Caylee's drowning. He continued by saying that George Anthony planted duct tape matching the brand later found over Caylee's mouth in a way that would implicate his daughter. He also picked apart the prosecution's assertion that the odor emanating from Caylee Anthony's car was caused by a decaying body. He claims that it was actually from a bag of garbage that had been left in the trunk. Caylee's former boyfriend, Tony Larazzo, he took the stand and he testified that Casey had told him that her dad had SA'd her and that her brother Lee had tried to feel her up, but he did not succeed. Caylee Anthony's ex-fiance, he took the stand and he stated that he always felt like Lee was standoffish and sullen around him. He's quoted saying that she told me at one point in recent years that she woke up one night to Lee standing over her, and then at another occasion she woke up and Lee was actually groping her. When Kronk took the stand, he got a little confusing. So initially, Kronk is the one who found Caylee's body. But when he took the stand, he testified that he actually never discovered the body. He says that that never happened. Then he would later state that he actually indeed found Caylee's body. He picked up the bag, he shook the bag twice, and the skull came out. So his testimony was by all means confusing.
Reports stated that there was a strand of hair discovered in the trunk that was microscopically similar to those found on Caylee's brush. It also showed characteristics of apparent decomposition. Investigators also took an air sample from the trunk of Casey's car, and it was found to contain chemical compounds consistent with human decomposition.
George Anthony would take the stand, and he took the stand to defend himself. He claims that none of the essay claims that Caylee Anthony was saying were true. He denied all allegations that that was a thing. George Anthony not only had to take the stand to defend the allegations of SA, during the time of the search, there was an alleged volunteer searcher named Crystal Holloway who came out and said that she was having an affair with George Anthony. And when she asked George Anthony about the disappearance of Caylee, George would describe Caylee's disappearance as an accident that snowballed out of control. George Anthony denied saying that. He denied having a relationship or ever being intimate with Crystal. He even laughed it off and told the defense, of course they would use this. And he continued to explain that yes, he has gone to Crystal's house alone, but only because Crystal had confided it into him and his wife Cindy that she was suffering from a brain tumor. George Anthony admits to sending Holloway a text and that he may have dropped off a letter at her house. He states that he doesn't see anything wrong with what he did and that he has nothing to hide. Lee Anthony would take the stand and tell the court that he did confront his mother about Casey's pregnancy, but was told to let it go, and it wasn't fully discussed until about a couple days prior to Caylee's birth. Time Lee saw Casey was on July 15, 2008 at the family home, where Lee says when he entered the house he had to pass Casey's white Pontiac car, and he said the smell that was coming from the car was very strong and potent. According to Lee, Caylee Anthony kept insisting to her mother, who kept trying to figure out where Caylee was, that Caylee was with the nanny and that she should not be disturbed because she was sleeping.
Tony Larazzo told the juror that he and Caylee Anthony met in 2008 through Facebook, and the two hit it off. He quickly developed a good relationship with her daughter Caylee as well, and the trio would spend afternoons at a nearby pool where all seemed well and the child appeared happy and cared for. Tony states that Anthony never mentioned to him anything about Caylee's disappearance and carried on as though everything was normal. Tony admitted that Caylee Anthony was a good mother in certain regards. He also admitted to feeling disgruntled and put off by the fact that Anthony failed to alert him, as well as police, of Caylee's disappearance for as long as she did. During his testimony, he remarked on how she never acted afraid or disturbed in any capacity during the time and showed no concern over her daughter's mysterious absence. The couple apparently got into a heated argument after he learned of the 2-year-old's disappearance. Two former roommates of Tony Larazzo testified that Casey stayed in their apartment during the disappearance of her daughter. Nathan Lesnowich and Cameron Campagna testified that they never saw Anthony angry, sad, or depressed while she was staying with them, and both men said they met Caylee, but the child never spent the night at the apartment. At some point in June, the men testified that they never saw Caylee again, and when they both asked Anthony about the whereabouts of the child, they were both told that she was either with the nanny at the theme park or going to the beach.
Neighbors of the Anthony family came forward to testify. One neighbor claims that on June 18, 2008, Casey came to his house to ask to borrow a shovel to dig up a bamboo root. Another neighbor claimed that he saw Caylee Anthony's white Pontiac car parked backwards on June 16, 2008, and this doesn't really seem suspicious like normally, but the reason why it was is because one, this is the day prosecutors say was the last day that George Anthony saw his granddaughter, and two, apparently the neighbor says that Caylee Anthony always parks her car face forward, not backwards, so that was suspicious. Simon Birch, the owner of the tow company that had towed Caylee Anthony's car back in June 2008, he took the stand to talk about his encounters with dead bodies in cars over his 30 years he's been doing his job. And he states that the smell that was emanating from Caylee Anthony's car is equivalent to that of what he has smelled when actual dead bodies have been present in cars. A software designer testified that somebody had searched chloroform 84 times. They had also searched head injuries, ruptured spleen, chest trauma, and internal bleeding off of the Anthony's home computer in March 2008, which would normally be during the times that Cindy and George would both be at work. Though it was later determined that chloroform was actually only looked up once, not 84 times.
Cindy Anthony took the stand and claimed that she was the one who researched chloroform on her computer. She also stated that the stain that was in the trunk of the car that was allegedly caused by Caylee's decomposing body was actually there when the family purchased the car 8 years prior. Jeff Ashton, the lead prosecutor, told the jury how Caylee, the young mother, was motivated enough to the extremes to achieve her freedom. Something needed to be sacrificed. That something was either the life she wanted or the life that was thrusted upon her, he said. She chose to sacrifice her child.
During their closing arguments, Jose was not allowed to bring up the unsupported essay claims. However, he did have an affecting closing statement. During his closing argument, he pointed out the lack of physical evidence that could definitely put Caylee in the trunk of Caylee's car or actually prove that Caylee killed Caylee. After 11 hours and a jury of 7 women and 5 men, after 6 weeks of testimony and 400 pieces of evidence being presented, the verdict was finally in.
Caylee Anthony was found not guilty. She received 4 years and a $4,000 fine for the 4 counts of lying to the police, but since she had spent nearly 3 years in prison on trial, she would end up getting time served.
Caylee Anthony was released from Orange County Jail shortly after midnight. As she left the jail, she passed about 100 protesters who showed up demanding justice for Caylee. That is the story of Caylee Anthony. Sadly, Caylee has never gotten the justice she so gratefully deserves. We don't know what happened. In real life, we don't. We weren't there. But we have theories, we have ideas, and we have thoughts. And ultimately, the math ain't mathin'. 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4. So when you try to make it equal 5, there's always going to be suspicion on you. And I think that the Peacock documentary probably would have been good if she would have came in, said what she had to say, defended herself, had proof, had evidence, and told us exactly what happened to her daughter. But when you give the same answers you gave 10 years ago, what was the point? But you know what? We'll get into that in a part 2. So if you want to see that, don't forget to subscribe. I upload weekly, and until then, be safe.